All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. I've got Jordan Mann from the Big J Little J show on with us to talk a little Duke Miami this week. Jordan, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing good, man. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no, I cut your program a few weeks ago on YouTube. It was recommended, and I watched. I don't remember who you guys played the week before Florida State, but watched that breakdown in the Florida State one, and I was like, I got to get this guy on at some point. So I thought you guys did a really good job, and so I appreciate your time for coming on. Not to rub salt, but let's talk a little bit about this, SMU game. Just heartbreaking. Obviously, you have some chances. I like the call to go for two. I mean, it's gutsy, it's ballsy, and I don't know, maybe the right decision, maybe not, but you got a chance to win it. I think you go do it. So just big, but chances for Duke to win this, and Rhett Lashley almost sounded like apologetic for SMU winning the game afterward. Just big picture thoughts on Duke coming out of that game with the loss to SMU.
Yeah, I mean, the going for two was the right decision the whole way, especially with the field goal issues Duke had that game. This honestly reminds me of the lateral game that Duke's playing Miami this upcoming weekend, but 2015 Duke was 6-1, played Miami at home, had an emotional loss with the way that game ended, and that derailed the season. Duke was 6-1, ranked top 25. They lost that game, then they lost three in a row right after that, including a 35-point loss to UNC the following week
Hmm.
to make Duke 6-5. And so my concern for Duke is this another emotional loss like 2015 where it derails the season, or do the guys be like, hey, put it behind us. We're 6-2. We have Miami on deck, and obviously the history with Manny Diaz and even David Feely. David Feely was a strength and conditioning coach in Miami. Like these guys are going back home. Like, can Duke get up for their coaches? And hopefully, as a Duke fan, they can, and they can score points off of turnovers instead of 0 points off of six turnovers last weekend.
Yeah, if we step back though and look pretty big picture, 6-2 is probably better. You don't want to settle for that, right? Like you don't want it to turn into like it did several years ago, where it just kind of like cratered from there. But even with a tough game coming up against Miami this weekend, which I don't know how many Duke fans are jumping off the ship if they lose to a top five team on the road, but you know 6-2 and what may even end up turning into 6-3, like still stepping back, like is pretty good progress so far for year one under Manny, and obviously they've got a chance to add to that down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the over/under win total was 5.5, and Duke cashed that in 6 games or 7 games. So they're
Yeah.
6-1. And look, the two losses Duke's had, they were up going in the fourth quarter at Georgia Tech, and they lost SMU in a game that's basically never been done before. And so you have those type of two losses. Young team, new staff, year one. Like there were, like you said, there weren't high expectations for Duke. So taking a step back, 6-2 is a perfect spot for Duke in year one of Manny Diaz.
So you mentioned this a little bit, but heading down to South Florida this weekend to play Miami. Just overall big picture thoughts on Manny going home. Like every game means a lot, but there's no way that any of them could mean this much, right? Like but
Yeah.
I tend to think that maybe that inspires the players to play a little bit harder, but like how much harder would you really play, against a top five team anyway? I don't know. Like just I think it's more of a storyline and has less of an impact on anything really. But just big picture thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like it's a cliche. They're going to go play for their coach in the game because every week the team plays hard. But I think you'll see a more focus this week of prep for Miami. Attention to detail because I think in the back of their minds, maybe the forefront of their minds, they know that it's big for them because I'll go 2 years back when Duke played Miami and Duke beat Miami at Miami. They did that as a redemption for Jess Simpson, who's now the D-line coach at Georgia Tech. But it was Jess Simpson and David Feely's first time being back from Miami since they were let go, all part of Manny Diaz staff. And Duke smoked cigars after that win.
Yeah.
So does Duke bring cigars just in case for Manny Diaz? So even if the coaches say it's just another game, we both know that it means more than that for Manny coming home.
So I want to ask you two questions about this. Duke forced six turnovers last week. In the Virginia Tech and Cal games, Miami turned the ball over a little bit more than I think people expected. I think they had four or five total in those two games. Do you think that increases the likelihood that Manny will be pretty aggressive defensively in this game?
Yeah, I do. I think Cam Moore's a great quarterback with high potential, but he is susceptible to throwing the ball, making bad reads or forcing tight throws, kind of like what Kevin Jennings did against Duke this past weekend. Kevin Jennings has played great for SMU, and he looked very subpar against Duke's defense. And I think Duke's going to throw looks to where Cam Ward is going to be confused and try and trust his arm more than he should. And that's the recipe for success for Duke. You got to get the ball. The defense has to score. I mean, we saw it against Florida State that I don't know if Duke had that pick six, if Duke wins the game against Florida State, the way the offense was playing.
Yeah. On the other side of that, right? Maybe the negative side, which we talked about, you mentioned a little bit. They do. I think SMU scored one time after a Duke turnover, but even that, or no, I'm sorry, Duke scored one time after an SMU turnover, but even that was like a 60+ yard drive. So I'm not sure if you count that as like points off of turnovers, but nonetheless, what was the major issue in your opinion of just not being able to capitalize on those opportunities? I know field goal kicking is fluky, and kind of weird, but man, in a game against Florida State where they scored 17 points off of 3 turnovers. Now pick six helps that. They then go to a game against SMU and they scored 0 points off of double that amount of turnovers. Like, how is it so boom or bust?
Man, that's a great question. It's just been the offense has been very inconsistent for the whole year. I mean, the Florida State game, 17 points, but one was the pick six. Then we had a pick that went down to the 15 or 11 yard line, go 3 plays, kick a field goal for -1 yards, and then had a touchdown off of scoop and score basically. And that's just been the recipe for Duke for whatever reason. I don't know if it's play calling. I don't know. It has to do with play calling. Malik Murphy year one, and honestly, Jordan Moore's been banged up for Duke since the UConn game, and he's on a pitch count basically. And when you lose your wide receiver one, who Jordan Moore is, it's tough. And you're seeing Duke really sputter with prime chances after the defense is given the offense short field. So I think Duke has to establish the run a little bit better than they had the previous 2 weeks.
What were your thoughts on Murphy? I thought this was one of his better games. Opponent considered, right? Obviously, there were some good games early in the year, but opponent considered, I thought Murphy actually played pretty well. And Miami's secondary is one that I think Duke could potentially take advantage of. Now you gotta block the front seven for sure, but I thought Murphy's play was pretty promising. Obviously, the offense is still pretty boom or bust, on Saturday night, but I thought the way he played overall was pretty impressive.
Yeah, this was probably his best game in a Duke uniform against, and it was against SMU, which is good because the last few weeks he's really struggled throwing the ball. And I don't know if it was scheme oriented, like don't take any chances or what, but it seemed like the playbook was more open against SMU, and he hit some great throws. But he is the stereotypical rhythm quarterback. When he is in rhythm, he's made a couple throws. He can make the tightest throw in a tight window. He dropped a bucket down the sideline to the Pankle in double coverage that you haven't seen all year. I haven't seen a Duke quarterback make that throw in maybe my lifetime. But then he throws an RPO slant that is 5 yards left of the receiver or right of the receiver after he's missed one or two. He's very much a boomer bust QB where if he's in rhythm, watch out. But once he throws one or two bad throws, then it's going to take him a couple of possessions to find it.
Yeah. Florida State had a little bit of success slowing Cam Ward down this week. He had his worst statistical game and still pretty good, but as far as yardage and touchdowns, it wasn't great. But Miami was able to quickly pivot to, okay, we'll just run you to death. And they had over 200 yards rushing. And they, at the end of the day, I think when you play in a rivalry game or a game that means a little more, or you're undefeated in the top 10, you just want to get out with wins. It no longer matters like what it looks like. But they were able to pivot pretty impressively and just say like, yeah, well, fine, we'll just run the ball. Thoughts on, how Duke would stack up, if Miami said like, hey, if we have to lean on our rushing attack because you are kind of confusing Cam Ward or he's made some mistakes, like how Miami's front will match up with how Duke's front will match up with a pretty good Miami rushing attack.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what benefits Duke for this is they've already played Hampton from UNC, who's arguably the best NFL-ready running back in the ACC, arguably. And so with his skill set, what he did with what he does at UNC, Duke did pretty well at containing him for the most part against UNC in that 21-20 win. So Duke can adapt against the run game. I'm curious to know what they want to take away first, whether it's the pass or the run against Miami. I guess we'll see. But, yeah, I think since Duke's already been prepped and tested against Amari and Hampton, I think Duke will be ready for Miami as well.
Is there, outside of playing a top five team on the road, that's having their best year, it looks like in a really long time. So outside of all those things, what concerns you the most in this game? Whether it be a specific matchup, if it's, Cam Ward, if it's the trenches, just, wherever, what's the biggest concern you have from the Duke perspective?
The biggest concern for me is moving the ball offensively. Like the one thing about this Duke defense is they respond to adversity so many times, and against Georgia Tech or Florida State, either one, Duke had like 6 or 8 3-and-outs and offensively, and you cannot do that. We both know you cannot do that against the top 5, top 6 team in the country. And so the wear and tear of the defense has to be rested after an emotional loss, and the offense has to control some sort of time possession against Miami.
Yeah. It's pretty early in the week. It's Monday. So, I don't know if I don't think you guys have done your preview on this yet. Have you?
No.
So I won't hold you real hard to a prediction, but Miami a 21-point favorite. ESPN says that Duke has about a 9% chance to win this thing. Do you think they keep it closer than that 21, or do you have are you picking an upset here, or just, are you think Duke's able to keep it close, or just what's your lean on how this probably ends up going down?
I'm cautiously optimistic in keeping it within the number. I think Duke can keep it a 10-point. Like they can flirt around a 10-point game where going into the second half, then we've seen weirder things happen in the ACC to where Duke can come back from that. And I'm hoping that's also me being optimistic as a fan that Duke keeps it within 10. But I do think Duke keeps it within the number of 21 in this game.
Yeah, I don't think that would. Miami has. They really kind of dominated Florida State, but even really, that was a 2-score game with 5 minutes to go, and I don't think. I think at this point Miami has blown enough people out that I think they're happy, kind of. I don't want to say coasting, but just getting out, staying healthy, and getting on to the games that are going to determine how good their season really is. The games that they're 3-touchdown favorites in, I don't know. Well, they could obviously turn it on at any point and blow a lot of the teams in the ACC out. But yeah, I kind of like Duke plus the 21 at this point. I certainly am not bold enough to take a Duke upset. No offense at this point on a Monday. Maybe a few more cups of coffee through the week, and I'll get there on Friday or something. But yeah, I will. I'll take Miami to win, but I kind of think Duke covers, which maybe that's bad news because I'm kind of a jinx. But man, where can people follow you? Where can they find your show and the rest of your content?
Yeah, you can follow me at the Big J Little J Show on Twitter, at JMan's Takes on Twitter as well, and I have a YouTube channel at JMan_ where the podcast is on there. It's on Apple and Spotify as well. And for basketball people, I do film breakdowns. And so when Duke plays Florida State, plays Miami, whatever, I'm gonna have a film breakdown of basketball season when that comes around the corner.
Awesome. Man, I appreciate you a ton. Guys, I'll link that YouTube channel and show in the description. You guys can go check it out. But thank you for hanging out, and good luck this weekend.
Hey, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
You bet.